Hey guys, in our recent Bonneville video, we showed some on-screen data from the MoTeC, and it was a cool way to kind of put some perspective to the runs. So today we're going to go through two data logs, the fastest log that we have from the 369 Roadster and the fastest log that we have from the 987 Valley Fever Streamliner. So go through some of the information that the MoTeC shares and try to kind of paint a picture of what these runs are like for not only the driver, but all of these mechanical bits that have to go through such a long term of high stress or high horsepower operation. Before we jump into the data, it's worth noting that both of these cars are using MoTeC M1 ECUs, and they both are using the level 2 logging. So level 2 logging is going to be 200 channels of information at a max sample speed of 200 hertz. There's a level 3 logging, which has 2,000 channels at a max speed of 1,000 hertz. And sometimes you need that because as many sensors that are on these cars, they do kind of fill up. So we find ourselves juggling, taking some things off to add some things in. So depending on how much information you're trying to gather from a vehicle, at a minimum, you want level 2 logging, but in complicated situations like this, you may end up with level 3. First, we're going to jump into Greg Waters' 369 Roadster. The 369 Roadster is powered by a factory block 2JZ with a bunch of Brian Crower goodies that you can purchase through RS Garage or just have me build you an engine like it. It has a daily dry sump, VVTi cylinder head, Precision 8685. It's backed by a stock ratio TH400 trans with a 249 final drive, so long gearing. And one of the things you'll notice at Bonneville is the vehicles are being pushed off the starting line. So this particular vehicle gets pushed to around 45 or 50 miles an hour. Driver floors it, the race time starts, and the run begins. I say race time because it's an interesting metric to look at how long the run is. So when he lets off his throttle out here, he's around 70 seconds of wide open throttle operation. And that's what really separates running a vehicle at Bonneville versus a drag racing environment or a chassis dyno environment or an engine dyno environment, is you have your engine and your tuning in a real world condition under real stress, accelerating the vehicle to get a time slip. So, you know, as the dyno crazes over the years have come and gone, the one thing that everyone that worked for a time slip got was a time slip. And that's a real metric of how the vehicle performs. And this particular run, to go as fast as we did with a small engine Roadster and get that time slip is quite an accomplishment for the group. And some of the men in the camp that have larger engines came over and said, wow. And it's a pretty big wow. So T4 turbocharger, 2JZ, methanol, MoTeC, neat combination of parts, and a pretty good running engine. So let's jump into the run. As far as spooling up that 8685, if you look down here, we've got over 15 pounds of boost available, just over 5,000 RPM. So pretty good response. And as we go through this, if you see anything that pokes out at you, feel free to ask in the comments and I'll try to get with you on it because there's a fair share of information. While we're at the beginning of the run, let's also take note of the coolant temperature and air inlet temperature and the crankcase pressure and the oil pressure, because as the run goes on, some of those things start to deteriorate and some of them stay pretty good. So this car does not have a radiator. It's just a high volume coolant tank. And it does have a air to water intercooler with a big ice chest to help maintain these IATs over the course of a run. The IAT sensor is a fast response RIFE sensor, so we are using good data, which is going to help us keep our fueling in check, as the MoTeC is a speed density system, and it does take the actual air inlet temperature into account when it's doing its math. So start of the run, 93 pounds of oil pressure, 65 kPa of crankcase pressure, 49 degrees of inlet temp, 114 degrees of coolant temp, around 15 degrees of timing, 12 pounds of coolant pressure. So we get to the top of the gear. We now have almost 37 pounds of coolant pressure, and this may seem like a large number. This engine has a 3-inch diameter water pump impeller. We're moving a lot of water as much as we can. And we want water pressure present because in a perfect world, everywhere inside of that engine would be relatively the same temperature, and you'd avoid localized heating. And how you avoid localized heating, which will then allow cylinders to lose control, is lots of water flow, lots of water pressure. That way you're scrubbing that water against the aluminum, scrubbing that water against the cast iron, trying to carry as much heat out of the engine with every time the water enters the engine compared to when it exits the engine, that you're scrubbing heat out of the inside of the engine. Top of the gear, almost 8,900 RPM. We have 20 degrees of timing. As you look at these numbers, keep in mind that you can't just take these numbers and put them into your map. This is a low compression engine on methanol. The crank reference angle has been set with the computer, but still these numbers are for this engine. Don't ever copy someone else's numbers into your map and think that it's just going to be the same. That's a recipe for disaster. As we go into second gear, you have a big RPM drop. So we went from almost 8,900 RPM down to 6,500 RPM. And that, for a small engine, is rough on the engine. We'd like to see smaller RPM drops, but we have a TH400, and this is how the torque converter behaves. Torque converter change could make this better, but for now, we got what we got. As we accelerate to the top of third gear, or the top of second gear, we're starting to get some boost. So we're up over 30 pounds of boost and just under 30 pounds of exhaust back pressure, and around 30 seconds into the run. As we go into third gear or high gear, boost is now up over 35 pounds, and it's going to be over 35 pounds for around 40 seconds. So again, Bonneville is an incredible place to test your skills, to test your components, to test your tuning. So I don't know when the last time you took your engine out and ran it over 35 pounds for 40 seconds, but it's pretty intense. As the car makes its way down the course, you can see the exhaust pressure and boost pressure get closer to one another, and we end around 39 pounds for around 37 and a half pounds of back pressure. Our oil pressure, however, has now decreased to 63 psi. Throughout the week, we moved through a couple different brands and a couple different weights of oil, trying to figure out if there was an advantage to be had. We ended up back in our Driven 1040, mainly because the oil condition at the end of the run was better than the other brand. It wasn't milkshaking with alcohol. The oil was staying pretty dang clean, which is pretty impressive. Our inlet temps have now swelled up to around 144 degrees, and our coolant temp is up around 137 degrees. Ignition timing out the back is almost 17 degrees. On the dyno, this engine wanted 19 or 20 degrees. Were we over time or under timed? Maybe. We can tie some of this knock data that we have here. We're not using the knock control as closed loop, but we're collecting data, and pretty consistently in second gear, we've got some noise coming out of number 6 and some noise coming out of number 4. And as we get out here in high gear, we have a bunch of noise coming out of cylinder number 4, and then it sprinkling along with cylinder number 6. So you have some cylinders that are very quiet and some cylinders that are very loud. And knock tuning, especially on alcohol, can be tricky, and you have to run the engine and look at the parts. So we weren't collecting any oil on the, we weren't collecting any aluminum on the spark plugs. The spark plugs weren't overheating. But when we take the engine apart, we'll look at these bearings and say, hey, do we have anything going on in number 4? Do we have anything going on in number 6? And kind of take that information with us to move forward. The car also has exhaust gas temperature sensors. So number 2 was a bit warmer by about 100 degrees throughout the run. These temperatures are 300 to 400 degrees cooler than what we had when we were running the car on gasoline or ethanol. So the methanol is a lifesaver when it comes to managing heat, but our pairing isn't as tight as we'd like to have it. And some of that may be ignition related. Job and Brett worked together this year to do some testing on his snot rocket, and they ended up with a CDI box, which improved some of the exhaust gas temperature behavior and less misfires. If we look at the fueling real quick, we can see out here, we've got these couple bunches of fuzzy lines in the lambda. And if we zoom in on that, you can see that we had some racket going on here. And this could just be misfires. So we're going to change the ignition system and try to get rid of some of these fuzzies in our Lambda. If you look at the Lambda trace throughout the run in high gear, it's fairly consistent. But out here, we've got these blocks of fuzzy and these big trim swings in the closed loop. So we went from closed loop numbers that were fairly small, 4, 5, 6%. And then out here, we had almost 10%. And we could be incurring some misfires that are influencing this change here. The traction was fairly managed. A gorgeous run. One of the runs that you're like, hey, that was a run. Again, I'll keep saying it because I was waiting for this time slip for some time. But we have a little bit of wheel spin in first. Nothing crazy out there at Bonneville. If you're under, say, 15 miles an hour worth of slip, you barely feel it. He did have a little bit of slip at the top of second gear. He never lifted his foot off, but it was happening. And as he goes into third gear, there's just a little dip right here where the traction control pulls some timing out as the wheel slip goes up over the threshold. So on the 2-3 gear change, it did wick the tire loose. The computer responded, pulled the tire or pulled the wheel slip back down, and away he went. But pretty cool run out of the Roadster. Before we move on to the liner, if you're catching all this fuzzy out here, if this is bothering you, it's not real. Tuning wheel speed sensors on these vehicles, you got to run the speeds. So it's a game of try this, make it run, try that, make it run. This car has pretty good wheel speed data until around 250 miles an hour, and then it just gets crappy. We're going to work on that a little bit and try to get it cleaned up. Just all you can do is tune it. This is one of those things. A race car evolves over time. But that's our 369 run. If you have any questions regarding this data log, ask in the comments below or shoot me an email. Next, we can take a look at Brad Bosworth's 987 Valley Fever Streamliner. The Valley Fever Streamliner is a mammoth of a vehicle to get the pilot, and it's powered by a Dart-based 2JZ with 2 Precision 6466 turbos. It's got a Liberty equalizer, 5-speed, and a quick change rear end. The gearing wasn't quite right on the car, so we did cross in 4th gear. There's a 13% drop between 4th gear and 5th gear, and by the math, the car was geared for around 450 miles an hour, and I don't think it's going to do that anytime soon, but it is a capable 400 mile an hour vehicle, which is pretty amazing considering the engine platform and the time that we've had to run the car and practice and get to learn it. So a lot to be proud of. As we move through the log, keep in mind that this is an F-based engine. So an F-based engine is going to be the displacement class that the engine is in. So if you look at different cars out at Bonneville, there's AA cars, the big engine cars, and then there's going to be H cars that are the small engine cars. But basically the way that the rules are set up, the letter designates a range that the engine displacement can be. So for us, moving into a new Dart block, we wanted to be able to overbore that engine over time as it needs to be rebuilt, but not leave the F class. So what we did is we had Brian Crower build us a couple of 84.5 millimeter stroke crankshafts. So we moved the piston a little bit less distance up and down the bore, which reduces the engine displacement, but allows us for future rebuilds for a larger bore size. So F2JZ, around 8.5 to 1 compression, steel, Brian Crower 6309 HD connecting rod, daily 7-stage dry sump. We messed with some different oil weights while we were out there. We battled with some crankcase pressure problems like we did on the 369 car, but all in all, the vitals stayed fairly consistent throughout the run, except for our record return run. We did add a quart of oil to the system. We overfilled the system, which solved some problems. You really can't get enough oil in these cars. You take an engine and you rev it up, and the oil it gets worked hard. So incredible place to test your parts, but hard on stuff at the same time. As we move through the run, keep in mind that the rear wheel speed sensor was not operable. So we don't have the correct calculated gear on the dashboard, but the MoTeC is going to make gear changes around 9,200 RPM, and there's not going to be any traction control involved, so I do have to move my foot around in first gear to maintain traction. But after that, I think that as soon as I went into second gear, I really wish I would have had 5 or 6 more pounds of boost on tap, because it barely spins the tires through peak torque in third gear. And in fourth gear, if you look at the engine speed line, there's a bit of a crest through the middle. That's where the engine's turning the tires the most. But overall, decent amount of traction throughout the run. It actually went through a set of tires in one run. That's how hard the salt was this year. Again, tall gearing, so you leave the truck, push truck when you can. So when we come off the push truck, the engine starts to accelerate, but it's not very fast. When I leave the truck, it's pretty lazy, and this is an 80-second run in total, but all this time is just wide open throttle. So if you're gonna make any last minute adjustments before the turbos come in, now's the time to do it. We don't make any boost until around 15 seconds into the run, where you see the engine speed perk up. That's about where the manifold pressure comes up. So right there, we get a little spike of boost, say about 16 pounds of boost. It starts spinning the tires, so I take my foot out of the throttle and I find a throttle position that allows the tires to be hooked up. And as we go towards the top of first gear, I'm working my foot back into the throttle, and then the gear change is made right around 9,200 RPM. There's a fairly big pronounced dip of ignition timing on the gear change. If you look at that right there, that's the MoTeC taking power out of the gear change to save driveline parts. Last year we broke in a shaft in the quick change, and we didn't want to do that again, so we just let the MoTeC shift the car, and the MoTeC will suck a bunch of timing out and then add that timing back in over time. So if you look at the timing comes out fast and then goes back in slow, and you can set all this up however you like in your MoTeC system. But these big dips in timing are to help save the driveline. If we look at the boost curve as the car moves down the course, at the top of first gear, we had around 18 pounds of boost. At the top of second gear, we had 37 pounds of boost. And as we get into third gear, say by let's call it 7,600 RPM, we have 40 pounds of boost available. And that 40 pounds keeps swelling. The top of third gear, we're 44 pounds, and then we're in that 46, 47 range. And one of the things that we can talk about real quick is the behavior of the turbocharger and the pressure ratio that the turbocharger is working under. And if you look at the manifold pressure, if you look, there's a bit of a crest here. This is how the turbocharger kind of naturally wants to behave. The CO2 is targeting a dome pressure, not a manifold pressure. And if you look at the back pressure on the system, or the exhaust back pressure, this is when the turbocharger is around 1:1. And as the engine speed increases, the manifold pressure actually drops down a bit, because it just can't fill the hole. You need a larger turbocharger. So even though this car has two 6466s, it would benefit from a larger set of turbochargers, which is pretty crazy considering it's just a little 2JZ. The knock data, just like the Roadster, there's a bunch of information here. What do you do with it? You can do whatever you see fit. I do have some timing correction available in the ECU throughout the cylinders, but there's knock noise. It's happening. So what's real knock and what's not real knock, you have to keep working on the engine and figure it out. It doesn't break the first time you knock it. And if you're using a gasoline-based fuel, you can knock an engine on purpose on the dyno and understand what actual knock looks like, and then move forward with your tuning. For us at Bonneville, we're collecting the data, and we can compare it over a course of events to kind of find out what's real and what's not real, because between those events, preferably we're looking at the engine parts and seeing what they have to say about how they're living. This engine is controlled in two banks. So you have the front bank being cylinders 1 through 3, the rear bank being cylinders 4 through 6, and there's a fuel trim difference as you look down this engine. So once we're in high gear, our short fuel trim is pretty tight, you know, plus or minus a percent, which is pretty good. But the rear trim is 4 or 5%. So when you take that information and then you look at your EGTs, well, now we have, if we pick anywhere in here, we have cylinders 1 through 3 do run a bit warmer on EGT than cylinders 4, 5, 6, but they're all fairly consistent, and there's not any terrible trouble going on. If you want to see how quick the EGT reacts, you can see this little swell in temperature where if we pick a number, let's say pick number 3, 1495, and then 1569, and then back down around 1500 degrees. That's that timing retard on the gear change. So is the engine under timed for the conditions? Maybe a little bit, but it's just a tuning process. So the next time the car's out, we may put a little bit more timing in it. But if we look at our ignition timing as a whole, we have high teens, mid-teens, 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 down to 15, 16 degrees at the end of the run. So the move would be to put a degree of timing in it, run the vehicle again, see if it accelerates harder, see if the knock data changes, see if the EGT data changes. But this is one of the benefits of these long runs under stress, is you get to collect so much information. And this car will now go to that level 3 logging where you have 2,000 channels, 1,000 samples a second, to where we'll be able to have these huge data banks of information, but nonetheless, a pretty cool collection of information as it goes. Another thing that I thought was pretty funny to look back and laugh at, if we take our qualifier run, which is this white line, and this is a functioning primary parachute, so you have this big decrease in speed where you're going to go from over 380 miles an hour, and just 5 seconds later you're going less than 200 miles an hour, versus when the primary chute broke off and you had all this time going by with very slow amounts of deceleration, until finally I felt that it was slow enough to open the secondary chute, and then it pulls the vehicle speed down. But the rate that the vehicle decelerates is pretty impressive when you look at those two things. Another thing between this run and our qualifier run was the rear wheel speed was causing a bunch of havoc, where the throttle was opening and closing, manifold pressure was moving up and moving down, because most of the aims are based off of speed and gear. Well, when you lose a critical sensor like rear wheel speed, the functionality of your tuning may change. So we were fortunate, like I said in the video, that the throttle didn't fault, but the throttle was moving open, close between around 70% and 100%. It just fortunately didn't fault, because that would have ended our run, which would change the whole course of the week. So pretty interesting there. But you can see that during the 2 runs, as we come out here, we were able to say match the speeds earlier on with our acceleration. So if we take this run and we overlay it, we were pretty similar acceleration until we moved into 3rd gear. And then as we move into 3rd gear, we start to out accelerate the run we made before, putting another, say, 30 miles an hour onto the run, which is pretty awesome. One last thing I wanted to show is the 2 fuel maps. So the fuel maps are the interpretation of the volumetric efficiency of the engine. So this one that's on the screen first is a VVTi 3.2 liter, and you can see it has this big bulge in the center of the map, and that's that inlet cam advancing, manipulating how much air can enter the engine. So VVTi, you get faster turbo spool. It's a higher efficiency engine at lower engine speeds, period. This is an 8685, again, with about a 1-to-1 pressure ratio. And if you move from, say, 7,500 RPM at 109.2 out to 9,000 RPM at 102.9, you kind of see that how the high RPM efficiency trails down. And there's some discussion to be had because you have a single 85mm turbine versus two 66mm turbines, and you start thinking through gas flow and whatnot, and there's a bit of a difference because both engines have the same camshaft profile, just one of them is a VVTi and one is not. So if you move over to the liner, which is a non-VVTi JZ, you have a fuel map that looks quite a bit different. So you've got this area where there's not a lot going on. This plateau through here is just before the turbocharger spool, and there's not a lot of efficiency to be had. And as you move into some turbo spool, and we go back out to that 7,500 mark, we have 115.1, and as we go to 9,000, we fall into 112.7. So we have three numbers. Now, again, these are broad strokes. The numbers themselves are going to vary due to injector calibration, whether or not both cars have the same exact injectors, and they don't. So there's a discrepancy there, but what you're trying to kind of gather up is the difference between when each engine program moves less air. And it would be interesting to take this one step further and build a smaller JZ with more airflow as far as turbochargers go and see where we end up. So, you know, we're talking about building a sub 2-liter JZ for the Datsun, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in terms of efficiency. You know, and again, out there, it's not a game of spooling the turbos. It's a game of making the most power in the operating range of the engine, and you're not on a road course, so turbo lag's not really your enemy in this case. You're just trying to make the most amount of power possible, but it's pretty cool to see the differences between those two fuel maps and how they play out. So again, if you have any specific questions about some of the stuff you saw today, you can comment below and I'll get to you as I have time. I try to read through the comments, and it's a good place for us to kind of coexist and be nice to one another and have a good time and learn something. So if there's something here that you have a question about, feel free to ask and I'll get back to you as I can. I appreciate your support. I appreciate you coming along on the adventure. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.